I don't know what I don't know. Okay. And I'm scared, but I have to do this because if I don't do this now, I'm never going to be able to do it later. The conditions are good. Yes, I might lose money, but I'm willing to take that risk. Even if I lose money, I'm still going to win because I will have learned something.
Are you ready to transform your life? This is a no-nonsense show helping immigrants like you create generational wealth, even while working full-time. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Saket Jain.
Welcome back, Migrate to Wealth listeners. Today, we're talking to Derek Clifford, the world traveler, the globetrotter, the guy who has had multiple degrees of freedom, and we'll get right into it, what those mean for you. Hey, Derek, thank you for dialing in, man. I know the time zones are crazy where you are right now. You're dialing in from Japan, right?
Yes, sir. And by the way, great to be here with you. Amazing to talk with you once again.
Well, thank you, Derek. And as we were talking, I think we started talking off air, and I just realized we started talking for 15 minutes already, and we didn't even catch up. Let's hit record. A lot of this conversation is going to be good for listeners as well. Derek, how are you doing, buddy?
Dude, things are amazing. Just living day by day, enjoying the freedom that we have built for ourselves and trying to stay healthy as well this whole time. Just living a complete whole life and just so grateful and blessed to be able to do what I'm doing right now. So thank you for asking, sir. And what about you?
Derek, I'm doing good, man. As I know, I was telling you, I quit my W-2 back in December, and I really thought that I'll have a lot of time on my hand, but somehow I filled it all up. Somehow I don't have enough time. But I'm having fun.
It's amazing.
Right? I'm loving it. My kids are hating me. So life's real. Nothing has changed except me not being on W-2. So Derek, let's start with one thing, man. So I know you are a firm believer on 5 degrees of freedom. So we'll hit that first. We'll park that question for a second now. But what I really want to understand is how you got to doing what you do. What's your migration story? Staying true to the name of our show, Migrate to Wealth. So what's your migration journey?
Yeah, so I guess, I started out as an engineer way back in my undergraduate, and I'm going to try to keep this as brief as possible because it's a long story, but I want to try to make sure I break it down fairly to convey how I got to where I am now.
Yeah.
But, I was W-2 working for a very long time, and that's what my parents taught me. That was the path, right? You work a good job, you get a high salary, and you eventually retire at age 62 and a half or whatever the retirement age is now. I know that France just moved it to 70 or 60, something. There's been pandemonium. Yeah. But anyway, I was going down that path and even looking to get an MBA to try to get like a bigger shovel to help get myself down that path. And the only way that I knew how to build wealth was the Dave Ramsey method, right? Which was get a job and pay off all of your debt. So, I paid off my debt like a maniac when I graduated from school, when I graduated from my undergrad, and then started saving for grad school to get my MBA. And so I did all of that, right? I paid off all of my debt. I paid like $65,000, which was quite a lot back then, considering people were making 45, 50K out of the gate. That was a lot of debt to have. So I rented for a while and, paid off the loans and everything. Then what happened was I met my wife, or soon to be wife. She was my girlfriend at the time, and I had met her in Houston, Texas, where I was working. And then she was living in Washington State, and I eventually moved over there to get close to her. And then she changed my mindset completely. She taught me about Rich Dad, Poor Dad. She went to those Get Motivated events back in the early 2010s and, the mid 2010s and stuff. And so she really opened my eyes up to entrepreneurship. And so Dave Ramsey and the W-2 is not the only way to do it. And so I got fascinated by this, right? And at the same time, she had purchased her condo in Washington State in 2008, literally 2 months before the crash happened, right? She bought it for $250,000. It was like, within walking distance of her grad school. She's a physician, so she was going to graduate school at the time. And so a couple of months afterwards, all of a sudden the property started dropping. And after 6 months, her property was worth about $90K when she bought it for $250, and there was a big mortgage on it, right? Well, fast forward 4 years, right? And she's ready to graduate and leave. And I'm getting ready to do my master's degree, right? She still couldn't sell the property because it was only worth $180,000 and we still had a mortgage on it. We couldn't write the check. We were both starving students, so to speak, right? And so what ended up happening was we had to rent it out. We just had to. And so as soon as we rented this thing out, we're driving down from Washington to California because my wife got her residency down there. And then I soon followed and got a job as a project manager down in California after that, right? And as we're driving down, we got our very first rent check coming in. And the rent check exceeded the mortgage, and it exceeded the property taxes and the electricity and all of the bills and the HOA and everything. And it got me thinking, and the light bulb went off. And it's like, oh my gosh, if we did this on accident, imagine what would happen if we did this on purpose, right?
Right.
And so that's when kind of like my engineering brain went haywire, and I spent like a year studying everything I could, right, on real estate. And eventually what happened is I took my very high salary and graduated from graduate school, took my high salary in the Bay Area, and I was turning around and I was buying like a house in Indianapolis almost every month with my unfair advantage, which is my very high salary. And then pretty soon I got to a point where I was buying, a house a month, and I was doing 1031 exchanges, and it was just nuts. Like I was so busy, and I was going into the office every day, an hour and a half before the whole day started, right, to do business on Eastern time when we're here in Pacific, right? So I'm out there, working, and by the time the first year is up, we've got, 20 units. And now banks are turning me away saying, you can't get any more loans. And I'm like, uh-oh. So I started turning to commercial loans. And then I got my first multifamily, and then I kind of cut my teeth on that and did everything wrong that you could ever do on that multifamily deal. And then, eventually I started running out of money, and my partner started running out of money. And so then that's when I met Vinny Chopra. And Vinny Chopra was my first mentor, and he taught me about syndication back in 2018.
Smiley Chopra, right?
You know him.
Yeah,
That's
I know
awesome.
him very well. Yeah.
And so he taught me the ropes behind real estate syndication. And it took me a few years to get everything going, and wrote a book, started a podcast, trying to, attract people to the incredible power behind real estate investing and how it got me so inspired. And then that finally got me to the path where I got into GoBundance, and I started getting into better networks of people and started getting inspired and setting these amazing goals. And so within about a 5-year time frame, we went from about 20 units, or I would say even maybe like 2 or 3 units, to now we have over 450 under our control right now.
Oh my God, Derek, that's amazing.
Thank you. By 450, I mean we're general partners controlling nearly 3/4 of all of them as a joint venture partner or as a lead general partner. So it's very easy and obvious to see that I'm a very busy person, but yet we still have managed to be able to have the lifestyle that we have because of the systems that we've set up to help pursue the 3 degrees of freedom, which we can talk about a little bit later on. But that's kind of my whole journey, my background.
Man, this is an amazing journey, Derek. And I think your journey is not unique, right? But it's very unique. It's very unique, but not unique. And I'll say that why I'm saying that. It's because you started like anybody else would, which is go study hard, work hard, make your money, and then eventually life will turn out good for you, which essentially means at 62, 65, 75, God knows when people retire or what that age is going to be. And if there's going to be a social security alive, who knows, right? And that's a different podcast for a different day. But I think your pivotal moment for you was, of course, growing up. I'm sure there were multiple pivotal moments, but financial pivotal moment was when you met your soon-to-be wife at that time.
Yes.
And that's really opened up. I want to ask her, what triggered her to understand these things, right? Because I met her. It's not like her upbringing would have been very different than ours. I don't know if you have the insight into that or if you have conversations with her on that, but I would love to see what triggered her to follow a different path.
I've asked her this too, and we've talked about this multiple times. She actually her family were immigrants coming to the United States. So her mom and dad were actually, have you heard of the Khmer Rouge before in the 80s? That's the genocide and, all that happened. So my wife is Cambodian, and her parents both came over here when they were less than like 20 years old, when she was just an infant, coming over to the United States as refugees. And they had nothing. The only thing they knew how to do was cook. Right? Because they had all the recipes from back at home, and that's the only thing that they could think of that would generate some income. So they started a restaurant business, and they did extremely well. And then they ended up selling it, right? And then pursuing other ventures.
Sure.
So she actually saw all this happening as she was growing up, and how hard her parents had fought and struggled. And so I would say that Sophie's mindset and her attitude came from watching her parents, and that led to her not being lazy at all. So she knows what it's like to work hard. And so she has always been about the mindset from the very beginning, since I've ever met her. And that piece, and very insightful question that you asked, so I have to give that to you for picking that up out of the story. that mindset piece drives everything. And she just kind of grew up with it. She was also very fortunate in a way to have that background, even though her parents struggled so hard. She saw all of that, and some of it has carried through and helped us as well.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting when you look back, and I know you have your own podcast as well on your own network. If you look back for any of your guests or any of your folks in the network who have been successful, there's always been a defining moment for what changed their mental model drastically. There are micro moments and then there are major moments in life, right? And I think for you, the major moment was when your wife introduced you to the Purple Book. It seemed like the Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which has been a gospel for a lot of us, where it gave you a different way of looking at the world, which a lot of folks don't. Now, the problem with that book, I always say, is that that book tells you what, doesn't tell you how, right? So you still have to take an extra step. So it gives you the mental model. Yeah. Now you're asking questions, which is great. Now you're looking for answers, which is what the best thing the book could have done for anybody, right? So I think where I was going with that was, how did that, now you understood everything from your wife, but to take action into buying a house a month, sitting in California, buying in Indiana. I can never say Indianapolis, so I'm going to say Indy. That's my Indian tongue. I could never say that many words in anything. So
you did great, man. You did great.
Well, thank you, buddy. Thank you, Derek. So how did that happen? From I understand the accidental investment in Washington State. Perfect. That makes sense. A lot of folks do that, right? You happen to have something that you got lucky with. But then now you're doing intentional. Why did you pick buying in Indiana? Because what most people thinking are, I kind of know the answer, but I want to hear your answer, is it's too far. I don't know how I'm going to manage it. I don't have a team. Let me just go buy the most expensive property in California because I can see it. I can feel it. I have an emotional connection to it. It looks cute. Yeah. How can you buy sitting in California that far out? How did you get over that hump?
Yeah, we really did try. We tried really hard to do that, to make that mistake of buying that primary residence. Actually, I shouldn't call that a mistake, because most of the properties in the Bay Area just exploded in value back in 2015, 2016. Right. But we just couldn't afford it. Like, we didn't have, enough income, because at the time I had just started my career in the Bay Area and as a contractor. And so I was making, half the money that a full-time person would. And then eventually I did that. But even if I had the capital, or even if I had the money to do it, I probably still wouldn't have. I still would not have, because my engineering brain, right, it went straight to bigger pockets. It went straight to all of the resources in the books that I could find about how to find cash flowing properties. And I was trying to do the math on all these properties in California, and it just didn't pencil, right? Like that 1% rule just never came out. So I had to find another market that did make sense. And so what I did was I found a network of people that were investing in different Midwestern markets from the Bay Area. And what they were doing, this is a genius plan. And I really wish that I had jumped on the train to do this. But what these guys did was, let's say you have, $1 million house, which in the Bay Area, as you know, is pretty much commonplace, right? And usually a lot of that comes from being in the same house for a decade or more, right? So odds are you have $500,000 worth of equity or more sometimes to be able to tap in, to use for anything. So what these guys were doing, which was super impressive to me, is they were getting a line of credit on their house, using their house as a bank, and they're buying for properties in cash out in Indianapolis, in St. Louis, in Cleveland, in, Kansas City. And then what they would do is those cash properties would be more than enough to pay their line of credit payment every month. And then combined with their high salaries, they would attack that line of credit down as quickly as possible in the open period of that line of credit, right? And then they would pay it down. They'd pay it off in like a year or two, that $100,000 that they borrowed, right? Now they have a cash flowing property that's continuing to pay money, right? They have one paid off property. And so then they just do it again. They take the same, amount of money, and then they go and they put it back into another property and then pay it off. And each time you add a house, you're putting more income into your pocket. So the payment time is quicker. So I was watching these guys do this, and I was just picking their brain and trying to get their resources and trying to get comfortable around doing something like that. But basically it came down to a couple of things. Okay. There's the 4 C's that I believe works every time. The 4 C's are coaching, consistency, clarity, and connections. And I had consistency working for me. So I'm a firm believer that if you tackle one of these with a complete ambition, like you are just going into one of these C's, right? The other three are going to follow. Because if you are extremely consistent on something, right, like me, over a year or over 2 years, eventually you're going to get connections. You're going to find a network, right?
Yeah.
And pretty soon you're going to get a coach. And then after that, or maybe at some point during that, you're going to have some clarity as to what you want to create. And the same thing works too. If you put yourself into a coaching situation, you're going to get all three of those over time also.
Right.
So whichever of those four that you relate to, pick that and go into it. So again, for me, it was consistency, being there every single day, because that's me. I can do that. I can say, all right, I'm waking up at 5:30 in the morning so that I can get out of the house by 6:30, make it into the office by 7, and have 2 hours to work before the job starts, right? That was my superpower. That's what I did every day to leverage that to make it work. And from there, I got the connections, which then ended up being, this group that were investing, from the Bay Area using HELOCs to get the connections and the confidence to fly out to Indy and meet people, right? Get myself comfortable around it, and then just start tackling it. And then the 4 C's also got me through the execution of actually doing it as well, right? Building your connections up inside of Indy, right? Getting mentors inside of Indy, to be able to do all of this. And so that's kind of what happened over time for me. I leveraged that consistency piece all the way to the end.
There's so many golden nuggets, right? So you've dropped. So I think one of the key thing is that I always tell folks is that you can always think we as human race can think ourselves out of anything, good or bad. It goes consistent, right? It's kind of like we can talk out ourselves or think ourselves out of bad situations. No. You can also think yourself out of good situations. So at that time, this 4C model I really love, and let's go over that one more time. It's your coaching, your consistency, your connections, and what's the fourth one?
Yeah. And the other one was clarity, your goals.
Clarity, right? Yeah.
To see.
And sometimes I think people are focusing on clarity, right? That's the only thing they want to focus on, clarity. I would love to get your perspective on that, and then we'll shift gears. I think clarity is evasive. And unfortunately, clarity cannot be there until you act. Because the more you act, the more you become clear about two things.
Yes.
One thing is where you want to go. And the second thing is your inabilities to do something so that you can find and close those blind spots by either improving yourself, getting yourself to the next level, surrounding yourself with people who can help you with those blind spots, right? I don't know if you ever thought about it. Out of these 4, I think 3 are great. Connection, coaching, and consistency. They're in your control, right? So you can either find a great coach, you can build your own network, or you can be consistent. But when you talk about clarity, have you ever thought about focusing on clarity? Is that even possible? Or you should just focus on these 3 levers and clarity will come?
Yeah, very good point. I haven't necessarily thought about it completely in that sense, because you do need to have some sort of background or knowledge or some sort of inspiration to get you there. But by the word clarity, I really mean vision, or being able to see something so clear that what you want, it's like a burning desire, right? It's like this fundamental drive that's going to push you through. And eventually you're going to get that, right? I mean, while talking to connections, that light bulb's going to come off. But if you get the light bulb coming off because someone in your family, or you've seen someone, right? I've seen something like that happen where, they're just walking along and just going about their business. And then all of a sudden your uncle or something mentions how their friend, became infinitely wealthy, or they're driving around these Lamborghinis or something. And then a light bulb flashes, right? And something goes off. So I guess for clarity, I just wanted to fit it into the C model. But I think you're right. I think it's a very uncommon way for people to have that be a lead C to go in. But I think it is something that's super essential and really needed, because if you're doing the connections and the consistency and the coaching, you're still going to need some sort of true north, some sort of compass to be able to help you say, okay, what approach am I going to take? Am I going to invest passively by being a passive investor, or am I going to be active and really trying to go after it? You need something to help you see what it is that's tangible that you want to take.
Also in this model, what you talked about, right? There's kind of like, why are people paralyzed to make a decision or to make an action? It's really because they're asking the question, I don't know how to do it, right? It gets stuck in that bubble of saying, I understand. Like a friend of mine called me the other day saying, hey, I loved your podcast. You're not telling me how to do anything. I'm like, I think if you're looking for a podcast, you may be looking for a coach now. I think you've graduated from the podcast because it's a great question to ask now. Okay, I'm ready to do something. The whole inspiration for the podcast is not to turn into a training course. No one's going to listen to it anyways, right? It's really to share the stories, and someone's story may hit you so hard that your clarity or vision that you're talking about may be flashed right in front of your eyes. And that's exactly what these conversations, these connections, these coaches are going to help you do that. I had a professor in school in Columbia who would always say, you know how the old adage goes, saying that where there's a will, there's a way. He says actually the other way around. Where there's a way, there's a will. Because what happens is when you have the clarity of, Derek has done it. This is how he did it. I now have a way. It may not be the only way, but I have a way to get my freedom. And we'll talk about freedom in a quick second here. But now I've seen something happening in front of my eye, and I know this guy. He's willing to share with me. Now I have the will to do that. Now my path may change 1,000 times, which is perfectly fine. But now I saw it possible, so I'm going to do that. I think I would feel like 90 to 95% of the population, human race, is in, I can't see it happening because no one has ever done it. And there's going to be one person who has done it. You just need to find that one person who has done it to make sure that it's actually real, right? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's dead on. I think something that also will help, right, for people that are maybe in what I call analysis paralysis. That was the one thing that was holding me back, right? I was like, okay, I see how this works. Like the numbers make sense. And I've been fortunate enough to be able to kind of fall into this situation because I had that property in Washington, right? So I saw, in a very mechanical sense, how it all worked, right? Like the rent comes in and then we turn around and we pay the mortgage and, and that's how it works, right? Now, here's the thing. When I did it first on my own, I was really nervous. And it took me 1.5 years to take any action. And I realized I was being in analysis paralysis. And do you know what changed all of that? When I looked into getting into my first deal as not a money-making opportunity, but my learning
opportunity. Yeah.
A learning opportunity. When I looked at it and said, okay, I'm going to buy this house. And the worst case scenario is it's not going to work out. And maybe I sell it for $20,000 less and I just paid some tax, right?
Yeah.
But the risk of that was fairly low because I did my homework, right? Mm-hmm. So I decided that I was going to be like, look, I don't know what I don't know, okay? And I'm scared, but I have to do this because if I don't do this now, I'm never going to be able to do it later.
Right.
The conditions are good. Yes, I might lose money, but I'm willing to take that risk. Even if I lose money, I'm still going to win because I will have learned something, right?
Correct.
I will have learned how it all worked. And so that small perspective, that shift from trying to hit out of the park on the first one to saying, you know what I don't know, but I do know that this works and I want to keep doing it for long term. I want to learn something. I just plugged right into it and I did it. And that became, one of the best deals that I've ever done. So
that's awesome, man. I think it reminds me of a conversation I had with another guest where basically saying that the fear of loss is much bigger than the joy that you get from your reward. That's really what held you back. That's what held me back at some point. And the only way to overcome that is to get comfortable with that loss, right? And of course, we're not saying if you have the last dollar that your family and you are depending on, go invest that money. Don't do that. Yeah. We're not saying that, right? So I think don't take this out of context. What we're saying is that if you have the money, let's say 20,000, 30,000, 40,000, and you're deciding on an opportunity, and that's your first opportunity after you have done thorough due diligence, and now you're making a decision, should I go in or should I go out? I think the question you're asking is, what's the worst that can happen? And that's a great framework to think about, which is what you went, right? What's the worst that can happen? I can sell it for $20,000 less. And sometimes it's just a reframing that it's not a loss. I've spent $400,000 on getting my college education. By the time from when you got it to now, you got to spend that much money. And if you can learn a great lesson, as in how to continue moving forward by paying $20,000, it's actually a much better deal if you think about it, because most of us have not used a college degree. Most of us have used our practical life experience by doing it, right? So that degree is actually a loss. Yes, you got a paper diploma saying you're a smart person for the world to recognize. But in essence, you didn't learn anything new, right? That you could implement.
Yeah. For the most part, I do think that degrees, unless you're a doctor or you're you're practicing, like you're a surgeon or lawyer or, something like that, I would say that most degrees are basically a certificate that shows that you can learn something and stick with something over a consistent period of time to be able to do it. And it's what people use to kind of filter you versus the outside world to give you a shot as a W-2 employee. So I love what you said there, and I could not agree more.
So Derek, now let's talk about freedom, right? So I wanted to keep that anchor on and keep dragging the conversation until we hit that point where, so now you are coming from a point of, and I don't know if you actually hated your job or not, but you didn't see a light of the ray until like 62 or 64, whatever the traditional path was, right? So I can't imagine you didn't necessarily like it. I can't imagine anyone who says, I'm doing it willingly. Most people are doing it because that's the only model they know how to do it, right? So from that, which is you could buy some location independence, maybe back, but now maybe you can, a little bit more location independence. But when we talk about freedom, because freedom could mean a lot of different things, right? Like for me, I was telling my wife, freedom for me is I get to do where I want to do, with who I want to do, when I want to do, right? It's really, I don't want restrictions, so I can never start a brick and mortar business because I'm never going to be there. It's going to become my cage and I don't want it, right? So knowing what I wanted, for me, the freedom is important. But tell us your perspective of freedom.
Yeah, so I believe that as an engineer, in engineering, we talk about these things called the degrees of freedom, right? So if you have an object that's moving along one axis, it's got 1 degree of freedom because it can only be moved like in a line, right?
Yeah.
And if it's like on a piece of paper, you've got 2 degrees of freedom because it can move, X, Y axis, right? And then if you have 3 degrees of freedom, then you're talking like, 3D
three-dimensional.
Space, okay.
Yep.
So coming from that context, I realized that most people, when they think of freedom, they think of it as I got to have enough money to be able to live the lifestyle that I want to live without working a full-time job right now.
Yeah.
And so that means that they've got to take all of their active income or the portion that they have available to them and put it into passive investments or some sort of investments and then make a small return on it so that they can live off of that. And then the nest egg continues to grow and so on and so forth, right? Well, when I did the math on that, it was going to take me like 30 years to do that, to live comfortably off the Dave Ramsey method, which is invest everything you have, your disposable income, and live off of 4% of that nest egg so you can take the dividends and just use that as your living expenses.
And I think that model is flawed. We can talk about it later, but that's
completely.
Fine. Yes, that's
completely.
Fine. We're not endorsing that model.
No, not at all.
Because I have principally an issue with that model of
me too.
Again.
So, but either way, like no matter what you're trying to do, you got to have some sort of nest egg of capital to be able to put into some investments, or you've got to be able to sweat through it. You have to work through it, right? Yeah. Now, what most people forget is that you can actually get location independence right now. Like most people look at, okay, when I'm trying to get financially free, what they're actually saying is that they want to be locationally free. They want to be time free, and then they also want to be financially free, which means they can do everything they want. But here's the deal, right? This is a true story. When I was in the California Bay Area, okay, our monthly expenses were around $10,000 a month. That's with our mortgage, taxes, food, gas, everything's expensive there, right?
Yeah.
So here's the thing. We had about $5,000 to $6,000 worth of passive income at the time coming in from all of our properties, right? And in order for me to make the extra leap, it's going to take more effort and energy for me to get to that 2x so that I'm not just at like the $10,000 mark in passive income. I want to be at 20,000 in passive income so I could continue to live and then travel and do all those fun things, right? With all the things that come with the Bay Area. As soon as we left the California Bay Area, we sold our house and we started traveling. It turns out you can do a lot of living in a lot of great places in the United States alone for like $5,000, right? Airbnb is $3,000, right? $4,000. And then because you don't have any utilities, you're basically paying just for gas and food, right?
Very much.
And so what we found is that when we became locationally independent, we became financially independent because our expenses started dropping. And once we became financially independent and locationally independent, I was able to start hiring virtual assistants. And the virtual assistants helped me do my job, right? and help me do things to be more productive with my time, right? Thinking through and being a systems person. So you see how there's like these different layers and these different degrees of freedom. And the more that people are pursuing each one individually, because for instance, I've met people before that don't care about location freedom at all. They're a homebody. They like to stay home, right? So why are you working so hard to try to get to a lifestyle where you don't, why can't you just get your time freedom and financial freedom and not worry about the location? So that's the thing, is you got to kind of zero in on what it is that you actually want in life. And so sometimes people don't understand that, and they just need to find internal alignment with that. And once you're focused, if all you really want is location freedom and you want it now, well, dude, learn some skills, right? Go code, like go find a job that you can do remotely. Start talking with your buddies, right? Like try to find something that will provide income that will give you $100,000 a year, right? That's all you're going to need. And now you can live in Europe if you want to. You can live in, Asia. You can live anywhere you want to if you're at that age. If you have kids, obviously it gets a little bit trickier, but you can still do bits and pieces of this where you can take sabbaticals, right? For like 3-4 months, or you can take your kids with you. I just encourage you to start asking questions. And so just think about freedom of choice in different layers, right? Not just one layer, like it's all or nothing. And so that's kind of what we encourage people to do, because we've seen those layers happen.
I love what you said there, right? Let's actually go deeper into that conversation, right, Derek? So I think part of that problem, I see that, the American dream of owning your own home. Let's talk about that for a second. That, especially coming from an Indian community, which is me, we all want big homes, right? That's how we grew up, because home's a symbol of success, right? The bigger, the newer, the larger the home is. Thankfully, I'm not cut from that same cloth, thank God. Otherwise, I'd be working at some company in the Valley right now, basically being the slave to the mortgage. But if you think about that, right, and that's one aspect. The second aspect is traditional education for the kids is very important. We cannot homeschool, right? The third mental model is, what would people say if I do this, right? Because I just left, like for me, I left a job at Airbnb, and everyone that I knew, they're like, what are you doing? Are you crazy? Because people die to get a job at a company like Airbnb, and you're just letting it go by your own choice. At least let them fire you, so you have a reason to quit. I'm like, no, that's fine. I appreciate that. I would rather leave on my own terms. It's better that way, right? So I think the problem I see in this freedom is freedom has become a fad, right? It's a great party word that, I want freedom, right? When it comes down to being truly free, it asks you to change how you look at the world, or how have you been trained to look at the world, right? So I was talking to somebody recently, like, everyone has a house, why can't we? Well, well, that's probably not the right way of asking the question, because everyone is sick, why aren't you? Why are you only looking at the positive things? If that's the comparison model, then you should compare about good, bad, ugly, whatever, right? So don't just take what you conveniently pick, something that you want to take. The question really asked is, which you said that, and you said in a passing, but it goes back to your 4C model, is really about people are not clear what they want. They're not living their lives. They're actually living a lie, not a life.
Bingo.
Right?
This is
that's
important.
A problem. And that's a problem, I think, no matter what you want to do, until you get true to yourself. And I also always tell us, people have a constraint of, well, I can't do this because of that, right? And the moment you start that thinking, your thinking is already limited. You're already putting constraint on your thinking that don't think, you're telling your mind, it's not going to happen anyways. Why do you even think about it, right? But really the question you're asking is that, if I had no constraints, what kind of life would I want? If I had no kids, and you have kids, that's fine. But if I have no kids, what would I want to do? And then say, now let me lay on the constraint and see what's realistic. At least you're being true to yourself, right? What are your thoughts on that?
Bingo. I think you're 100% dead on, because remember, freedom is about choice. If you have kids and you're in a situation, this is just a good example, right? You've got kids at home. Well, I mean, hey, there's 2-3 months out of the year where they're not in school. So maybe you make it happen. Maybe you give it a shot.
Sure.
Like, what if you tell your kids, hey guys, we're going to be living in Lisbon, Portugal for 2 months in the summer. What do you think? Right.
I'm going to let you talk to my wife really quick here.
Yeah, that's the thing too. It's like, it's all about choices and how you make them. Because if you immediately shut it down, right, then you're not opening yourself up to anything. Like, I completely agree with you there. And you first have to believe that it's possible or know what you want. That's why the internal alignment piece is so important, because some people think they want X, but they really don't. There was someone that we were mentoring, one of our investors we were mentoring, and they were constitutional attorneys, and they're in the legal field, and they've been working extremely hard. And their whole life, all they do is they work to buy bigger houses. And they had an amazing house in Lafayette, and just this incredible house, like, 4,000 square feet, right up in the top of the mountain, very high mortgage, tax rates, like everything, right? But they could afford it. And so when we talked with them about like what things they could do if they just moved to, Walnut Creek, right? And just got like downgraded and kept their salary. And if they took that money and started investing it elsewhere, the things that they could do with that. So it's all about choices, because they were just in that same mindset that you said, right? Like bigger is better. Just keep going, bigger, more expenses. You have more income to get more expenses. But I think you have to like really look inward to see what is it that you would want to do. And those are hard questions, especially if you're married. It's because it's not just you, it's someone else and your family. And so that takes a lot of time to figure this out. But the point is to start asking the questions so that your awareness gets higher, because when the awareness gets higher, then you start figuring out, okay, what can we do to start living a different lifestyle right now or in the near future? Not until some unforeseen time where you're just like, oh, well, we'll just keep saving until we get there. Or, man, I'm dreaming of this time. No, lean into it. Be proactive and start asking why and how right now. Because if the why is big enough, the how will get legs. And you'll be able to make it happen.
Oh, my God, man. I love that question. I love the last statement that you just made. I think it's a very powerful statement, right? That
I wish
when
I could
your
say
why
it was
is big
mine.
enough. Hey, that's all right.
It's not.
We'll give you the credit on this show. On this show, we'll give you the credit. Yeah, I think your why has to be big enough, right? Your why has to be big enough, because if your why is, I just want to make money. How much money? Is it a penny? Is it $1 million? Is it $100 million? What exactly is your number? And why do you want that, right? I think most of I was talking to a friend of mine recently, and he was like, well, you know what? If I switch my job, I'm going to be happier, but I'm not going to be making as much money as I am in my current job. I'm like, how much money? He's like, if I stay here, I'll be fine for the rest of my life. I can't spend that kind of money. That's how much money I'm going to have. So I'm like, what? It's a golden handcuff. It's really a golden handcuff. And if you want to live in a cage, it's a great thing to do. Right, your life's gonna be comfortable.
That's great.
You're gonna be fed, right? You're gonna be petted. You're gonna be all fine. But are you really going to be happy? So you have to ask yourself that question.
Yeah, one thing I have to pass along this piece of advice from some of my mentors. My wife and I have personal coaches that we've worked through things with, on top of all the other business coaching that we do. And one thing is, if you keep asking yourself why, right? Even through while you're working so hard and going all the way back, that's when you really start finding out who you are as a person. Let me give you an example, right? So I was working a full-time job. Let's just say that I'm back in that space, and I get the idea that I want to leave my full-time job using real estate as an investment to do that. Well, why, right? Well, the why is to have enough income to be able to support our lifestyle. Okay, well, why is that?
Yeah.
Well, that's because I want to be able to make choices. I don't want to be restrained. I want to be able to choose how and when I do things and whenever I want to. Well, why is that?
Yeah.
Well, because there's a wide world out there that has amazing things to see and experiences to be had. And why is that? Because we all deserve, including myself, to be the maximum version of ourselves possible.
Yeah.
Right. And so you see, you can keep going down this chain of why, right? Yeah. And eventually you'll find that, a full-time job and travel and entrepreneurship, it all has to be in alignment with who you are as a person. So you have to know what your values are and what you stand for. And once you know what those are, if you're working a job that does the same thing over and over again, and yet your personal values mine are, for instance, wisdom, prosperity, and adventure. Those are my three personal values. By the way, there's a Darren Hardy exercise that you can go through. You ask yourself 10 or 12 questions. And you can find 3 words that describe who you are as a person. And those are your values. I highly recommend everyone do that before doing goal setting, because if you set goals without being in alignment with who you are as an individual, then that's a problem, right? So definitely do those. But if you have those three values as a person and you're doing a job over and over again, you got to do something different by asking bigger questions to help you figure out, like, how can I get out of the situation little by little, or at least get into a different situation that's still a job, but is fulfilling the why. Because that's the problem. The problem isn't the job. The problem is, how are you going to become fulfilled? How are you going to be out, being able to go out and see things, right? So if that is for you, taking the summers off, right? And reserving 2 Airbnbs in Portugal, one in Porto, one in Lisbon, for like a month and a half each, just to go and do something different for a while, right? And that scratches your itch. That's the alignment with you and your personal being that you need to find. So you're not sacrificing your job, right? That's what I'm trying to get to this whole conversation. So thank you for allowing me to kind of get there.
No, Derek, this is actually amazing. I think this is what life is about, right? It's not about money. It's not about anything.
Oh, yeah.
It's really about being your full potential, whatever that is. For everyone, it's different, right? Whatever it is for you. Dude, I know you and I can talk, so I want to be respectful of your time. I know you're in Japan, so it's getting pretty late there. So switching gears to the last 2 questions, what is top 2 or 3 insights you're going to give to your young self?
Ooh, I would say that fear has no place in my life. And that's just speaking from someone who is making decisions completely out of fear. So I think I would go back and try to change my relationship with fear, because I was a very scared and anxious young man and boy. And I think that that's one thing I would give myself, is try things, right? Don't be so closed-minded.
That's awesome, man. One last question. Where does humanity needs to migrate towards intentionally?
Oh, man, this is such a spiritual question. I think that, humanity is a very strong word. Honestly, I think that people need to understand that you got to do good just to do good. And I think people are very self-serving these days. And I can say that because I was one for a very long time. But it's service that makes the world go around. And I think that helping other people lights me up, at least. I know that everyone gets a kick out of it, and it's kind of addictive, once you do it, once you start giving back. But I think that giving back knowledge, time, and even attention and energy, just listening to someone, just truly listening and trying to put yourself in their shoes, small acts of kindness like that just lifts the energy of the world up. And so I try to do that everywhere we go.
Dude, Derek, thank you again for coming on the show, man. I love this conversation. I think we're going to have you back. I end up saying that to every guest because I really enjoy these conversations.
Well, what does it say about your podcast skills? That's pretty dang good, man.
I know, is it? I love that, man. Hey, Derek, again, thank you for your time. Now, if people want to connect with you, learn more about the work you do, pick your brain on the freedom, where can they find you? Yeah. They can't find you physically anywhere because you're never stable.
That's right.
Never stationary. You're always moving.
Yeah, unfortunately. But yeah, LinkedIn is probably the easiest one, or Facebook or Instagram. Just Derek Clifford is at LinkedIn, or just hit us up on elevateequity.org, or our podcast is elevateequity.org/podcast. And for your listeners, free 5-point blueprint on how we got to where we got. Building equity is up in all parts of our life. elevateequity.org/podcast gift, all one word. That's just for them, free ebook.
Awesome. Thank you, buddy. Appreciate that, and enjoy Japan or wherever you are. Sir. Well, thank you.
Let's get you on our podcast as well.
Well, that's definitely, I would love to.
If you got value from this episode, you might consider sharing this content with a friend. But most importantly, be sure to take action on what you've learned. One way you can take the next step is to connect directly with Saket on an investor call. That link is waiting for you in the show notes below.
The content of this podcast is for informational purposes only. Please consult your own advisors when making any investment decisions. Keep listening. We'll see you on the next episode.